He stood alone beneath a sky that looked just like it did the day his grandmother died, slate gray, restless, and quietly watching. Asher Linwood had nothing left but a brass key and a map drawn by someone who believed in him when no one else would. The house was still there, perched above the cliffs like a quiet witness to history, facing the ocean with its white shutters sealed shut. It hadn't changed, but everything else had, especially him. They told him he had no place there anymore, that his name had been scratched from the will long before she took her last breath. That Linwood house would never belong to someone like him. He wasn't shocked, not after what happened at the funeral, or rather, what didn't happen. They didn't let him in, didn't even tell him the time or place. Asher learned about her death from a neighbor's post, not a phone call, not even a text. The family, wealthy and calculating, made their intentions clear. The house by the cliffs, the one with the curved staircase and the faded oil paintings and the faint scent of oiled wood and lavender, was going to be sold, as if it had never held the boy she raised when his parents couldn't bear the truth about who he was. But then came the envelope, heavy, yellowed, addressed in the shaky handwriting he knew by heart. It was her, somehow, even after everything. It was her. Inside, a folded sheet of paper and a key. Her scent still lingered in the folds of the note. Lavender and cigarettes. The letter didn't apologize, it never needed to. She simply wrote, "If you can get 100 of them to see you the way I always did, the house is yours. The deed will be unlocked with the key, but only when their eyes unlock first." That was it. No legal documents, no signatures. Just a map, a key, and a challenge, or perhaps a test. Asher reread her words under the dim kitchen light of his one-bedroom apartment 3 towns away. He hadn't seen that street in years. Not since the night he tried to bring a hit first boyfriend home, and the neighborhood association sent a letter asking her to maintain the image of the community. That same night, she made him tea, told him that love was not a burden, and told the association to go to hell. She paid the price for standing by him, and now it was his turn. The estate was now controlled by a private council of longtime residents, those who watched him grow up and whispered about him after he left. They remembered every scraped knee and broken rule, but none of the Sundays he brought her breakfast in bed, none of the garden weeds he pulled without being asked, just that he had become that kind of man. And yet, she believed they could change, or perhaps that he could make them change. He thought of walking away. He didn't need that house. He didn't need that town. But this wasn't about real estate. It wasn't about walls and windows. It was about memory. It was about the one woman who had seen every inch of his truth and still chose him. So Asher pulled out his laptop, opened Google Maps, and began searching, house by house, one by one, each address added to a spreadsheet, each name checked against records and directories. He didn't know what he was doing, just that he had to do something. He bought 145 envelopes, printed engagement-style photos, not of a lover, but of himself as a child sitting on the steps of Linwood House, holding a seashell to his ear. Photos of the garden he helped grow, of the treehouse he and his grandmother built together with scrap wood and stubborn nails. The letters were personal, handwritten, and carried no return address. In them, he didn't beg or threaten or justify. He simply wrote what it was like to grow up with a heart that didn't fit their frame, in a house where one person refused to let him shrink to survive. And at the end of each letter, he asked, "Would you ever sign your name for a boy like me?" It was a long shot. He knew that. But it wasn't about the odds. It was about the echo of her voice saying, "They will see you if you give them the chance." So he gave them a chance. And then he waited. If you believe in stories that change how people see each other, one letter, one memory, one choice at a time, follow Heart Stories for more. This is only the beginning. Part 2 coming soon. The letters were dropped into the mailbox just after dawn, when the streets were still damp and the world hadn't yet begun its noise. Asher stood there for a moment, palms pressed together like a quiet prayer, then turned away without looking back. There was nothing more he could do. Each envelope was now a seed buried in soil he could never control. All he could do was wait and hope it rained. The first few days passed in an eerie quiet. His inbox stayed empty. His phone remained still. No knocks, no calls, no letters returned, just the thud of bills and discount flyers sliding through his apartment door. On day 4, an envelope came back. Same paper, his handwriting. But the return address was scratched over in red ink. Inside, someone had torn his letter in half, stapled it together backwards, and written one sentence across it. "This isn't your world." He sat for a while after that, not angry, not broken, just heavy. The kind of weight that settles in the chest and spreads like cold through the bones. He thought of stopping, of closing the door on whatever this was becoming, but he remembered her voice, calm and fierce, telling him that truth only wins when someone chooses to keep standing. So he stood. Then, on the evening of the 6th day, a message appeared on his phone, a number he didn't recognize. The text was short. "I got your letter. I remember your grandmother's oxtail stew. I haven't thought about it in 20 years. Thank you." That was all, but it was enough to let the air back in. The next morning, another message came. This one from an elderly woman named Joan, who said she once taught piano to his grandmother and remembered hearing laughter echoing down the Linwood hallway when he was a boy. "I didn't know what happened to you, or why she seemed so sad that last year. I thought maybe you'd moved far away. I'm sorry I didn't ask." That one made him cry. Soon after, the silence began to fracture. A handwritten letter arrived on Monday from a man named Paul, who enclosed a photo, grainy, yellowing at the corners, of a 4th of July barbecue from decades ago. In the background, barely visible, was a little boy sitting beside an old woman, watching fireworks bloom over the ocean. The man had circled the 2 figures. "You probably don't remember me, but I was your neighbor. I used to think your grandmother was a bit odd, but now I think she just loved louder than the rest of us were comfortable with." By the end of the 2nd week, 7 more letters had arrived. Some were from those who had once voted to have his grandmother removed from the homeowners' council. Some came from people who hadn't spoken a word to her in the final years of her life. They weren't grand confessions. They were quiet reckonings, small admissions of regret, of misunderstanding, of fear. Asher read each one aloud in his apartment. He pinned them on the wall in rows, like museum artifacts from a part of history the world tried to erase. Still, not all replies were gentle. One neighbor called to scream into the phone for 5 minutes straight, demanding to know how he got their address. Another left a voicemail warning him not to push an agenda in their neighborhood. But then came the message that changed the rhythm of everything. It was an email from Eugene, the head of the original neighborhood committee, the same man who had publicly denounced his grandmother for endorsing immoral influence. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained just one sentence. "If you have time to speak, I do too. No threats, no insults." Just those 12 words. Asher didn't respond right away. He sat with it, reread it, stared at it for an hour. This was the man who had once stood on the steps of Linwood House and accused his grandmother of poisoning the next generation, who had turned his face away when Asher came to say goodbye the night she passed. But this wasn't that night. And maybe people, even the oldest, most bitter ones, were capable of something else. He typed, "I'm free tomorrow morning." The reply came within minutes. "Meet me at the garden gate, the one by the lemon tree. You know it." And he did. He knew it like he knew the pattern of her handwriting or the way she used to hum while folding towels. That gate had once led to everything safe in the world. Now it would lead to something else. Maybe closure, maybe war, maybe something entirely unexpected. He packed the letters in a folder, tucked the key into his coat pocket, and walked out into the morning mist, unsure of what waited beyond the gate. But this time, he was ready to be seen. The morning air tasted of salt and memory. Asher walked the old road in silence, the folder of letters tucked close to his chest like a second heartbeat. He hadn't seen the street in years, but everything about it remained unnervingly intact. The chipped mailbox shaped like a seagull, the wind chimes made from broken china, the pavement cracks that once tripped him as a boy. Only the silence felt heavier now, more aware of him. He stopped in front of the lemon tree, the one just outside Linwood House's side garden. The tree was thinner than he remembered, but still blooming. Beyond it stood Eugene, older than any photograph, his frame slightly bowed, a knit cap pulled low on his forehead. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just opened the gate without a word and motioned for Asher to step inside. The crunch of gravel beneath their feet was the only sound as they moved toward the back of the property. The garden hadn't been touched in years. Weeds crawled over the brick path. The bench near the fountain had cracked down the middle. But Asher saw it all the same, not as it was, but as it had been, where his grandmother read aloud on warm afternoons, where she planted lavender because it made him feel calm. Eugene stopped near the fountain and turned to face him. His voice, when it came, was dry and deliberate. "I read your letter." Asher said nothing. He didn't trust his voice not to tremble. "You wrote about the summer of '07, about how she used to hide you in the attic when the neighbors came around." He nodded. Eugene looked down at the ground. "I was one of those neighbors." There was no apology in his tone, just a statement, flat and heavy. "She always said you were different," he continued, "but I didn't listen. I thought she was just being soft. I thought—" He trailed off, eyes distant. "I thought I was protecting this place." Asher felt the familiar burn behind his eyes, but he refused to cry here. Not yet. Eugene reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled notebook. He held it out. "She gave this to me the week before she died. Told me to read it if you ever came back." Asher took the notebook with both hands. Reverent. Inside were notes, written in his grandmother's looping script, memories, recipes, quotes she'd copied from books. But the final page held only one line, underlined in bold strokes. "He is not what's wrong with this world. Your silence is—" Eugene looked up, eyes glassy. "I kept quiet too long." He reached into his coat again, this time pulling out a folded document, a signature page, handwritten names in ink, some shaky, some firm. At the top, Asher saw the words "Community Acknowledgement of Worthiness." It wasn't legal, it wasn't official, but it was something. "I've collected 72 signatures so far," Eugene said. "Some of them came to me. Others I asked myself. They remember her, and they're starting to remember you." Asher's breath caught. Eugene handed him the paper. "It's not enough yet, but it will be." And then, for the first time, Eugene extended his hand. Asher took it, and the gate, the one that had once closed behind him with such finality, stood open. Not just in wood and hinges, but in heart and in history. The list lived on his desk now, next to the photo of her garden in full bloom, a snapshot taken long before the lavender died and the shutters peeled. Asher read each name aloud every morning, as if summoning something lost back into the present. The page had grown thicker with each visit, each letter, each hesitant voice on the other end of a call. And yet, it was the space between names that carried the real weight, the silence of those who still couldn't sign. He hadn't expected forgiveness. He certainly hadn't expected kindness. But he was learning something he hadn't dared to believe before. That people, even the ones who had shut the door so long ago, were capable of bending without breaking. It began to ripple quietly. A woman named Martha, who once told his grandmother that Asher's presence made the neighborhood uncomfortable, brought over a pie and asked him if he remembered how she used to knit sweaters for neighborhood dogs. She signed without being asked. A teenager knocked on his door one Sunday morning with a clipboard and said his grandmother, bedridden and nonverbal, wanted her name added too. "She can't speak, but she made me promise. She raised me on stories of your grandma," he explained, eyes wide with something like awe. Even the postman, a man Asher had never exchanged more than a wave with, left a note on his mailbox, "Your letters are changing people." But change didn't come without resistance. 2 houses down from Linwood House, a man named Carl confronted Asher on the sidewalk, voice sharp with a bitterness that hadn't aged gracefully. "You think paper and sob stories make you someone worth listening to?" he hissed. "You think your grandmother's house should belong to someone who doesn't even belong here?" Asher didn't respond. He simply stepped aside. Some walls weren't ready to crack, but 2 days later, Carl's wife mailed a letter. Inside was a photo of her and Asher's grandmother at a community fundraiser. On the back, she'd written, "She called you the bravest person she'd ever met. That's worth more than any deed." The tally stood at 94. Then came the call from Eugene. "You need to come," he said. "There's someone here you'll want to see." The garden had changed. Volunteers had come, old neighbors, their children, even a few strangers who had heard the story and showed up with gloves and rakes. The weeds were gone, the fountain ran again, and at the center of it all stood a man in uniform, tall, gray-haired, leaning slightly on a cane. He held a folded paper in his hand. "I'm not from this street, Yim," he said as Asher approached. "But I served with Eugene a long time ago, and I knew your grandmother." His voice didn't shake, but something in his eyes did. "We were just boys, Eugene and I, Omim, in another war, another world. And there was a man I loved once. I never told anyone. But your letter, it reminded me." Asher stood still, wind catching the corners of the page in the man's hand. He unfolded it slowly and placed it on the table beside the fountain. A signature. His name was the 100th. Silence followed. Not the kind that punishes, but the kind that witnesses. Eugene stepped forward, a small box in his hands. "Your grandmother left this with me too," he said. "She told me it wasn't meant to be opened until the 100th name was written." Asher lifted the lid. Inside was the original deed. Not a copy, not a statement of intent, but the actual notarized document, signed and dated 3 weeks before she dies, and it was made out in his name, tied to the condition not of bloodline or approval, but of recognition. In a note taped to the underside, she had written, "If they see you, truly see you, then this house and everything it remembers is yours." No courtroom, no contest, just the weight of 100 acknowledgments that said, "We see you now." Asher looked out across the garden. People stood in clusters, holding cups of lemonade, brushing soil from their hands. Some laughed, some cried. All watched him. He had never belonged to this place, and now, somehow, it belonged to him. The front door creaked when he pushed it open, as if stretching awake after too many years of silence. Light spilled across the hallway floor in long golden slants, catching dust in the air like snowfall. Asher stepped inside without hesitation. The brass key, the one he'd kept in his coat pocket for weeks, rested now in the lock. Fulfilled. The house didn't resist him. It welcomed him. Each step brought him closer to memories. The worn stairs where he used to sit with hot cocoa on rainy days. The window seat where his grandmother once read to him by lantern, light during power outages. Her favorite chair still stood by the fireplace, draped in the same knit throw in lavender and cream. The scent of her lingered, faint but stubborn, like something that refused to be erased. The house hadn't been emptied after her passing. Much of it had simply been covered, tucked beneath sheets like old secrets. But the soul of it was intact, not just preserved, but waiting. On the mantel sat a frame he hadn't seen since he was 17, a photograph of the two of them in the garden, both grinning, covered in dirt from planting herbs. Behind the frame, folded neatly, was a note in her handwriting. "This house always knew who it belonged to. I just needed the world to catch up." That evening, the sun dipped low over the cliffs, casting long shadows across the porch. Asher sat outside with the deed in one hand and the list of names in the other. Some of the signers he hadn't even met in person. Some had only heard about him secondhand. And yet, each one had chosen to see him, not through a lens of fear or tradition, but truth. The ceremony was quiet, not official, not loud, just Asher, Eugene, and a few neighbors in the garden. They planted a young lemon tree beside the old one, a second chance growing beside what had endured. When the final spade of earth was packed, Eugene placed his hand on Asher's shoulder. No words were spoken. None were needed. Asher walked the garden path back to the front door, passing windows that now belonged to him, not because he inherited them, but because he earned them. Through memory, through persistence, through love. He stepped inside, closed the door gently behind him, and for the first time in his life, didn't feel like a guest in his own story. Would you have sent thee letters, even if no one answered? Follow Heart Stories for more stories that honor courage, memory, and the quiet victories that change everything.